Hare Krishna, everyone. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga, or Dandavat Pranams, depending on which mat you're in. I hope you're all well, and Happy New Year. I think I have done a film already this year, 2021, but I'll say it again. Happy New Year. I want to talk a bit today about Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella. Now, when I say those names, Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella, you might think it's some kind of pop group. Are those the names of the Corrs? The Corrs were one man and three women. Is that Bucks Fizz? Who are Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella? Most of you following this page will know I've been really stuck on the 1930s in Britain and the Hare Krishna movement. I had intended to do a little bit of research on the 1930s in Britain and the Hare Krishnas, but it's taken up a lot of my time, which has been okay actually, because we've been locked down most of the year, so I've had more time to commit to this epic book that I keep talking about, the history and diversity of the Hare Krishna movement in the UK. So I'm going to talk a bit today about Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella. When you're researching something, when there isn't a lot of data, it's sometimes easy to go off on tangents and go off and maybe make things up. Not that I've made things up, but I've looked at lots of sources and lots of information about the Hare Krishnas in Britain in the 1930s, and often they say different things. Different scholars or historians will say different things, and what I'm trying to do is piece all the information together and to put it in one source. I've actually talked a bit about Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella quite a bit on this Facebook page before, but I'm doing it in a bit more of a light-hearted way today. Today's short talk is a continuation on some of the previous talks I've given on this page. The Britain's first Hare Krishna movement, 1933 to 1937. Also the live recording I did outside of the Drayton Gardens property in London, which we believe was the first temple for the Hare Krishnas in 1933. And also that talk I gave recently on questioning whether Daisy Botel was actually really a disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj. And that short talk I produced has caused some questioning amongst devotees, and obviously some devotees have taken a different view from me. I've come off of the come off of the fence, and I've expressed a view that she wasn't a disciple of Maharajas, Guru Maharajas, and of course some devotees haven't agreed with that view, but that's fine. We're adults and we're allowed to disagree. Even in the Hare Krishna movement, it is possible to disagree with one another and still be friends at the end of the day. So, the Gaudiya was a magazine produced by the Gaudiya Mat between 1918 and 1938, and it often gave a lot of information about what was happening with preaching activities. Now, 99% of those preaching activities were in India, because the Gaudiya Mat, which had 64 temples in India, wasn't really doing much outside of India, with the exception of the missionaries that were sent to Europe back in the 1930s. So when Hare Krishna News was created in London in the 30s, and in Germany as well, we know about some stuff happening in Germany, it was reported in the Gaudiya magazine. And in the 12th edition of the Gaudiya magazine in 1933, we're told that 2 people were initiated. So I've talked on this Facebook page before about Arnold Korbluth. So Arnold Korbluth was initiated on the 1st of October 1933 at 39 Drayton Gardens, which is in Kensington in London. And we believe he was the first, let me get this correctly, Arnold Korbluth, who was given the name Krishna Das, was the first English person to be initiated in England. That's the best way to say it, because some of you will be aware of the existence of Ronald Nixon, also known as Sri Krishna Prem, some 12 years before that in India. He was an Englishman who converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism in 1921 in India. So we'll come on to him a bit later. But the first Englishman, sorry to any of my Scottish friends that are watching, the first Englishman that was initiated in England was Arnold, well, the first Brit, and probably the first European, was Arnold Corbluth on the 1st of October 1933 at Drayton Gardens. Now, the Gaudiya magazine also says that around the same time, possibly on the same day, because the magazine was written in Bengali, and it's only recently that it's being now translated into English through a huge task that a devotee is carrying out at the Bhaktivedanta Research Institute in Calcutta. So part of his work is to translate a lot of these Bengali newspapers about the Gaudiya Mat into English. So we're also told about a lady being initiated on the same day or around the same time. Now, her name was Hilda Corbell. However, we're not told about what name she was given. So we've got Arnold and Hilda, the first two British people, European people, to be initiated into the Hare Krishna movement in Europe. The other English people, other British people that we are aware of, one was Daisy Bowtell. I've talked a lot about Daisy Bowtell on this page. There's questions around who her guru was. Was it Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur? Or was it quite possibly Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, which is where I'm putting my money on. Of course, I don't bet. I'm not really putting my money in. It's an expression. I'm not breaking one of the sacred four regulator principles, but I would put my money on Daisy Bowtell being actually a disciple of Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj. And also, at the same time, a lady called Stella Harris. I love that name, Stella. It's very... when I say common, I don't mean that in an offensive way. You can tell she's definitely a British woman. Stella Harris was initiated. And those two, Stella and Daisy were initiated around February 1937. So that's who Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella were. They were really important people. Possibly the first English people, British people, to be initiated in Europe. Into the Hare Krishna movement. Now, in his book, in Bhaktivedanta Swami's book, Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhava, he talks about how popular the Drayton Gardens temple actually was. So we are told, and we read through looking at historical evidence, that at least half a dozen Westerners, so half a dozen is 6, around half a dozen Westerners were regularly attending the programs at Drayton Gardens. So they were English people, I assume white people, that was their race. They were white people attending a program at Drayton Gardens. And also, according to Bhaktivedanta Swami, in the book that he put together, he took 20 years to compile this, him and his disciples, to do all the research. We are of the opinion, or there is a strong view, that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had around 7 foreign disciples. So foreign doesn't necessarily mean English or British. There are other countries outside of India, not just Britain. But it's believed he had around 7 foreign disciples. So who were those 7 foreigners? So semantics is very difficult. People use different words to describe different things. I've talked a bit on this Facebook page before about Diksha and Shiksha and the different meanings and how they also mean different things to different people. But let's say, for lack of argument's sake, because I'm an open-minded guy, let's say that Daisy and Stella were disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. We can include them in the count of 7 foreign disciples, or 7 initiates into the Gaudiya Mat in the 1930s. I'll just pause. It's important that I mention the initiated names of these devotees. So Arnold Corbluth became Krishna Das. Hilda Corbell, we don't actually know what her name was. Daisy Bowtell became Vinod Vani Devidasi, and Stella Harris, I love that name, Stella Harris, became Vishnu Priya Devidasi. Of course, in Gaudiya Vaishnava theology or history, Vishnu Priya was the second wife of Nityananda Prabhu, one of the closest associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So how do we get to 7? How do we find 7 foreign disciples of the Gaudiya Mat, 7 foreign converts in the 1930s? So, believe it or not, there is not a list in one place of those 7 names, or I have not found them. Now, those names might exist in different books based on who you want to write about, who you want to research, but let's put those 4 names into the 7. So Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella, not Bucks Fizz or the Cause, the first English converts to be initiated in England in the 1930s. The 5th devotee I want to add to that list is Ernst George Schluss. I've talked a lot about Ernst George Schluss on this Facebook page before. He was German and he travelled to England, and he was initiated in England probably as early as January or February as 1934, and he was given the name Sadananda Prabhu, and he actually later went on to become Sadananda Swami. He was possibly, again, use of semantics, one of the first Western sannyasis in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. If you look up on Facebook, Sadananda Swami, there is a group of disciples in Austria, Germany that are still dedicated to him. He didn't pass away to the 1970s, and that keep his Facebook page and his website updated with lots of news and talks from him and about him. So I would add him as the 5th of those foreign disciples. So who were the other 2? When I released my film about Daisy Botel and Britain's first Hare Krishna movement, a number of devotees got in touch with me to say that Bhakti Saranga Goswami Maharaj, remember he was the 5th Indian-bodied disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to visit the UK, they are of the view, they've seen information that he initiated an Australian man in London. So that would have been in 1937, that was the year he was in London. He initiated an Australian man. I'm not aware of the Australian man's legal name or devotee name, just that he was an Australian man. So we'll add him, for lack of argument's sake, to the list and say he's number 6. The 7th foreign disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is a devotee I've not mentioned on this page before, predominantly because this is about the history of the Hare Krishna movement in Britain, the British Isles, which many people are so proud of. So the 7th foreign disciple I want to throw into the list, some of you may have heard the name, was Vamandas. So Vamandas was Austrian. And later on in life, he travelled with Sadananda Swami in Europe. He was a close associate of Sadananda Swami in Europe in the 60s and 70s. They met in India in the late 30s. From what I understand, I'm trying to piece it all together. Vamandas was Jewish by heritage, and he was in a camp in India, and that's where he met Ernst George Schloss, who was also in that camp for a period of time, who I'm therefore making the assumption was also of Jewish heritage, and was in the camp, and they met there, and it was through Ernst George Schloss, who became Sadananda Swami, that Vamandas then met. We don't think he met Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, but we believe he met Hridayabhan Maharaj. Hridayabhan Maharaj was one of those first disciples that came from India to London in 1933, and it's quite possibly he became a Diksha disciple of Hridayabhan Maharaj. That's Vamandas, an Austrian man. And later on in life, as I say, Sadananda Swami and Vamandas, Vaman Prabhu, would translate textbooks into German and Austrian about Lord Chaitanya to serve the public. So that kind of concrete list of, European, let's say, well, Australia's not Europe, is it? Okay, foreign disciples to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, I'd say relatively confidently, but could be persuaded otherwise, that those were the list of foreign disciples, and of which six of them were initiated in London in the 1930s. So Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella. Ernst George Schloss, who took sannyas later on. The Australian gentleman, and then Vamandas, who, as far as I'm aware, never actually visited Britain, but he is the seventh. So I really emphasised at the start of this talk about English people being initiated in England, because I didn't want to confuse anybody. Some of you will know about the existence of two other devotees that predate 1933. I've talked about them a bit on this page before. I've written articles about them. So who were those two devotees? Well, if you go back to 1921, we learn a story about a gentleman called Ronald Nixon. Just get the name correct. No, Ronald Nixon was a pilot fighter in World War I. He was British. He was from Taunton in Somerset, and he was educated privately. But despite his private education, he felt like he was missing something in life. He was from a wealthy background, and after a near-death experience in the war, he was, as I said, a war pilot for the British Army. He went to India. And in 1921, he converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Anyone can look him up online, search Ronald Nixon. He was given the name Sri Krishna Prem. And what's really fascinating about Sri Krishna Prem was his guru was a woman. I put a post on here earlier today. Women have played a really important key role in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Now, granted, perhaps not in ISKCON's short history, but in Gaudiya Vaishnavism more generally and more widely, women have played a really important role. So, thanks to a woman, Ronald Nixon converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism in 1921. And we're told that they both took sannyas, they didn't take sannyas together. She took sannyas first, she gave him sannyas, and then they ran an ashram together in the Himalayas up to the 1960s. So in the grand scheme of things, relatively recently. And then the other devotee that some of you may be aware of, you may have heard of, and I talked about him about a year ago on this page, I wrote a short article about him, was Baba Premenanda Bharati. So Baba Premenanda Bharati was an Indian gentleman of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Hare Krishna tradition who worked in London in 1902. Really long time ago, when he visited London, and he ended up staying for a while to work for a newspaper to earn some money. He was a journalist by trade. He'd converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the 1870s, I believe. In the 1880s, and he had a vision, a message to go to the West, very similar to Srila Prabhupada, to go to the West. And he did make it to the West. He made it to America in 1902. He stopped over in Paris and London to visit briefly. So it's always important when we're talking about the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, when we're talking about Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella, that we don't also forget Baba and Ronald, because they've also played an important part in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So today's talk really is a bit of a carry-on from previous talks that I've given. I will finally, after a year and a half, start writing, if you like, the encyclopedia about the current Gaudiya Vaishnava groups in the UK. In the Sarasvat line, I've identified 20 different mats or sanghas. So the Sarasvat line are all those groups that hail from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Maharaj. So ISKCON is one of those, and then there are 19 others. And I've identified 7 Babajis in the Nityananda Jahnavi Mata line that are not in the Sarasvat line, and 7, why 7, sorry, those 7 all have disciples in Great Britain. Now, I'm going to put a shout out on this page again, because I haven't discovered any. At the moment, I've made no reference in any of my writings about Lilith Prashad. So Lilith Prashad was the youngest brother of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the youngest son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He also was an initiating guru, and I know he has disciples. I'm connected with some of them here on Facebook, but they do not live in Britain, and I haven't discovered any disciples of Lilith Prashad living in Britain. Now, it's possible through times and dates that there are disciples of Lilith Prashad in the UK. Lilith Prashad didn't leave this world until 1980. So if there are any followers of Lilith Prashad out there, please do get in touch. So today's talk, which I think's gone on a bit now, about Arnold, Hilda, Daisy and Stella, the Fab Four in Britain's 1930s Hare Krishna movement. Hare Krishna.